My name is Katherine Elizabeth, and I was just 19 years old when I first stepped foot in Hawthorne, Tennessee, a small southern town where everyone knew everyone and no one knew me. My mother had passed 6 months earlier, and with my father long gone from our lives, I'd moved in with my Aunt Pearl, who lived in a worn but cozy farmhouse just outside town. Aunt Pearl was sweet but strict, and she reminded me often, a girl's name is her legacy. Don't let anyone write it for you. I hadn't planned to stay long, just long enough to catch my breath, finish my studies at Hawthorne Academy, and figure out where the pieces of my life fit now. But life, as I'd come to learn, had its own cruel timelines. It all began on the first Monday of February, when the icy roads had turned to slush and the town's main square smelled faintly of chimney smoke and sugared pecans. That's when I met Jackson Thorne, tall, square-jawed, and dangerous in the way a snake looks still before it strikes. He was 21, captain of the school's debate team, heir to Thorne House, the town's oldest and richest family estate, and the one everyone warned me about. That boy's heart is made of mirrors, he just reflects what you want to see, Aunt Pearl told me. Jackson had charm like lightning in a bottle. He could talk circles around teachers, charm pastors after Sunday service, and leave girls breathless with just a look. I should have known better. I really should have. But grief makes you soft. It hollows you in places no one can see. He started sitting beside me in the school library, offering to carry my books, leaving handwritten notes folded into my locker with poems he said he'd written himself. I was cautious at first. I mean, boys like him didn't usually look twice at girls like me, newcomers with thrift store coats and calloused hands from helping on the farm. But Jackson, he made me feel seen, important, special. A week later, I agreed to walk with him after class. We strolled past the snow-dusted elms along Mason Creek, and he told me how lonely he felt, how he envied my simplicity, how he wished he could start over too. I was too naive to hear the rehearsed rhythm in his words. By the second week of February, rumors started trickling in. I overheard whispers in the girls' restroom and giggles in the hallway. But it was Maggie Bell, the butcher's daughter and no stranger to Jackson's tricks, who pulled me aside outside the diner one afternoon. You're sweet, Katherine. So let me say this once. He's not falling for you. He's betting on you. I didn't understand. What do you mean betting? She looked around, lowered her voice. There's a Valentine's bet. Every year, he picks a girl, dares his buddies he can have her in his bed before February 14th, and he always wins. My heart didn't sink, it cracked wide open. I ran home that night, shaking with shame and fury, and I did something I hadn't done in months. I cried. The next morning, I skipped school. Instead, I marched to Emery's general store, bought ink, a pen, and the thickest journal I could find. That night, I began writing everything, every look, every line, every lie. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to be smart. I wanted him to forget that I mattered. And I wanted time to learn who he really was, not just to break my heart, but to prepare for the day I'd break his world. Because even at 19, I believed in something. Aunt Pearl always said, revenge is best when it walks, not runs. Let it take its time, just like poison and sweet tea. I kept my distance after that. Jackson tried to pull me back, and of course, he'd flash that toothy smile and say, you disappeared on me, darlin'. Thought we were getting close. But I'd nod politely and walk away, pretending I was tired, or busy, or just distracted. I knew now what I was dealing with, not a boy, but a predator dressed in a prep school coat. It was February 13th when it all came out loud and ugly, like thunder cracking over still water. The boys in Jackson's fraternity, Thorne House's golden children, had gathered at the old Barnett pub on the edge of town. And as young men with whiskey and egos often do, they got loud, real loud. A worker at the pub, Harriet Dobbs, a kind middle-aged widow who also happened to be my Aunt Pearl's friend, overheard their laughter. She came to our house the next morning with narrowed eyes and fire in her voice. They were talking about a bet, she said. That boy said he was just hours away from winning, that he'd bag the farm girl and finish the Valentine's tradition clean. I didn't cry. Not this time. I didn't even feel the shame anymore. Just a cold, calm resolve. The kind that settles deep in your bones and makes everything around you quiet. I'd given Jackson the chance to hang himself, and now he had rope and all. But I didn't go to the school. I didn't stand in front of the class and scream the truth. That would have made me look weak, like a girl scorned. No, I wanted something slower, smarter, permanent. That very day, I wrote my first letter not to Jackson, but to myself. I titled it, 5 years from now. In it, I wrote every single detail I'd need to remember: the insult, the wager, the way his friends laughed, and the exact words he'd spoken. "You can always fool a quiet girl," he'd said. "They're the easiest." That sentence became my battle flag. I buried myself in school after that, studied harder than I ever had, graduated early, and applied to Montclair College, 3 states away, using a scholarship and every cent Aunt Pearl could spare. I left Hawthorne that summer with a single bag, my mother's locket, and a fire that never died. The city of Charleston, South Carolina became my rebirth. I worked part-time as a clerk in a women's bookstore and studied economics with ruthless discipline. While other girls giggled about spring dances and courtships, I stayed up late studying property law and business finance. I'd circle words in my textbooks like acquisition, merger, equity, as if they were spells that could reshape the world, and for me, they were. I kept a photo of Jackson tucked in the back of my journal, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to remember his smile when the walls caved in around him. In my second year, I landed an internship at Galloway and Price, a private investment firm run by 2 retired Navy men who respected my grit. They gave me real work ledgers, contract analysis, and eventually, meetings with real clients. I never used my full name in town, just K. Elizabeth, and it worked like armor. I didn't want anyone connecting me to the quiet girl from Hawthorne. It was during that time I learned about the Thorn Club, an elite gentleman's establishment in downtown Charleston, owned by none other than Merritt Thorn, Jackson's father. It was a sprawling, 3-story building dressed in velvet curtains and old Southern money, a place for cigars, politics, and secrets. That's when the idea planted itself like a seed in the back of my mind. What if, one day, I owned that building? What if I bought it not to run it, but to ruin it? I folded the thought away, just like I did with every calculated dream. For now, I needed to rise, quietly, invisibly. The best kind of revenge isn't loud, it's the kind that doesn't knock. It turns the key, walks in, and sits in your chair before you ever knew someone else had the deed. By the time I was 23, I had 3 internships under my belt, a full-time job offer at Galloway and Price, and a savings account built brick by brick through sheer grit. I didn't spend money on fancy dresses or new shoes. I didn't go dancing. I studied markets, properties, and men. I watched how powerful men moved, how they talked in circles, passed laws to protect their fortunes, and wore their cruelty like cufflinks, all the while. I waited. It was an early spring of my 4th year in Charleston when I came across it, the opportunity I'd been dreaming of since the day Harriet Dobbs stood in our doorway in Hawthorne. I was working late in the office, reviewing estate portfolios, when I saw a thin file labeled, Thorn Club pending lease dispute. My heart skipped. The document stated that the Thorn Club's original lease was nearing expiration, and Merritt Thorn, the patriarch of the empire, had been slow to renegotiate. His real estate partner, a man named Clayton Wills, had fallen ill and passed suddenly, leaving no successor. The property was tied up in probate court, and legally, it was vulnerable. I stayed up that entire night reading every line. It was perfect. The club sat on the edge of King Street, surrounded by rising development and newer money. The Thorn family had held onto it like a relic, too proud to change but too arrogant to protect it properly. That was the flaw I'd been waiting for, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. A local developer named Sheldon Marks had already sniffed around, offering to scoop it up quietly and refurbish it into a hotel. But Sheldon didn't want it for revenge, he wanted it for profit. I wanted it for something far colder. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my bosses, Gideon Galloway and Harvey Price. I wore my hair tied tight and my best press blouse. When they sat across from me, I didn't blink. "I'd like to make a private investment," I said. "With your backing, of course." They looked surprised. I was young, female, and not from wealth, and that made me a risk. But I came prepared. I laid out the numbers, the market trends, the surrounding property values, the club's outdated structure, and most importantly the legal gap wide enough to drive a carriage through. Gideon raised an eyebrow. "You've done your homework." I nodded. "This club is vulnerable. I want to buy it before the Thorn family even realizes it's on the table." Harvey smirked. "That club's a nest of snakes, Miss Elizabeth. You sure you want to dance with them?" "I don't plan to dance," I said. "I plan to turn out the lights." They agreed. By midsummer, the wheels were in motion. I formed a shell corporation under the name Red Hill Holdings, with no ties to my real name. We made an offer to the probate court, and with no direct heirs of the late Clayton wills protesting, it was processed with almost no resistance. The Thorn Club's legal status shifted from secure to pending, and within 2 months, Red Hill Holdings quietly became the primary stakeholder. Not a whisper reached Merritt Thorn, not even a shadow passed by Jackson, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I didn't tell anyone, not even Aunt Pearl. I wanted it to be clean, undeniable, legal, and lethal. I hired my own team to survey the interior, discreetly take photos, and assess structural weaknesses. I memorized every staircase, every chandelier, every corner of the velvet-draped establishment where men drank bourbon and laughed about the women they'd conquered. I even found Jackson's name in the guest registry, still listed as a VIP member. He still came in on holidays, I was told, especially Valentine's night, when the deed transferred to my company. I waited. I didn't close it immediately. That would be too easy. No. I waited until February 14th the following year, exactly 5 years to the day since he'd made that bet on me. I wanted the walls to fall while the band was playing and the roses were fresh in their vases. A quiet girl always remembers, especially the night someone bets on her body. Valentine's Day in Charleston is a delicate kind of chaos. Horse-drawn carriages decorated with red ribbons, couples strolling beneath gas lamps, and storefront windows dripping in roses. The city sparkled that night, but under the polish, my revenge was taking shape like the quiet hum of a storm. I wore black satin and pearls. No red, no lace. I wanted to be the opposite of everything they expected to see on Valentine's night. My hair was pinned high, lips a shade darker than blood. I stood just outside the Thorn Club's front doors at 7:40 p.m., waiting for the final signature. Inside, men clinked glasses of top-shelf bourbon and puffed cigars rolled in Havana. The music from the upstairs string quartet floated into the cool evening air. The building looked unchanged, but in truth, every inch of it now belonged to me. The deed had been signed 3 hours earlier. The lease had officially expired at p.m. sharp. And Red Hill Holdings, my holding company, now had the full legal right to vacate the property at will. But I wasn't just here to hand out papers. I was here to deliver memory. At 8:04 p.m., Jackson Thorne arrived. He stepped from a black carriage in a long wool coat, hair slicked, lips curled into that same smug grin I remembered from 5 years ago. Older now, broader shoulders, but that same arrogance in his stride, as if the world had never told him no. He didn't see me. Of course he didn't. Men like Jackson only see what flatters them. I let him enter the building. 30 minutes later, I followed. I showed my private badge to the guard who had been hired by me just 2 days prior and stepped into the grand, cigar-scented lobby with its gold-veined wallpaper and red velvet carpet. A few familiar town names echoed around the drawing rooms. Charleston's elite, men who had never imagined a woman might one day own their playground. I stood by the staircase, waited. At exactly 9:01 p.m., the manager, Mr. Durant, a squat man with wire-rimmed glasses and the personality of wet cardboard, approached me. "Ma'am, everything is prepared," he whispered. "Lights," I said. "Cut them." With the flick of a switch, the chandeliers above dimmed to black. Gasps rippled. The quartet faltered. Glasses clinked nervously in the sudden dark. A single spotlight clicked on from the upper balcony, and I stepped into it. My heels echoed across the marble floor. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Then a voice rose from the shadows. "Katherine?" It was Jackson. I didn't respond. Not yet. I reached into my coat and withdrew a folded parchment, the eviction notice. It was crisp, embossed with the gold seal of the Charleston City office, and signed by the very judge who once handled the original lease decades ago. I tossed it down the staircase. It landed with a soft flutter at Jackson's feet. "What the hell is this?" he said, picking it up. "The end of your father's legacy," I replied. His eyes shot up. "What did you do?" "I bought it." A hush fell so thick you could hear the whiskey melting in the glasses. Jackson's face went pale. "I bought this club," I repeated. "Red Hill Holdings. That's me. The same quiet girl you made a bet on 5 years ago. The one you thought would fall into your arms by Valentine's Day." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "Tonight, on the very anniversary of that little game of yours, I'm closing the doors to your family's empire. Permanently. Everyone in this building has 15 minutes to vacate." There were mutters, confusion, Mr. Durant began ushering men toward the exits. I walked down the staircase slowly, each step deliberate. I was just a joke to you, Jackson, I said. But I learned how men like you operate. You mistake silence for submission, modesty for weakness. But some women, you don't break us. You sharpen us. His hands trembled as he crumpled the paper. I'll fight this, he said, voice cracking. You can try, but I own the land, I own the name, and I own your story now. He looked around, hoping someone might stand with him. No one did. They were already slipping out the door, not wanting their names attached to the spectacle. Men in silk vests and gold watches disappeared into the night like ghosts. Only Jackson remained. I stepped close enough to smell the brandy on his breath. Remember me every February 14th for the rest of your life. And with that, I turned, walked into the cold, and left the Thorn Club behind me in silence. The morning after Valentine's, Charleston was abuzz. It was as if the entire city had witnessed a ghost pulled from its grave and paraded through the streets. The newspapers called it the Velvet Collapse and ran front-page headlines: Woman silently buys elite gentlemen's club, evicts members mid-gala. But they didn't know the half of it. My name wasn't in the papers, not my real one. Red Hill Holdings kept me veiled behind legal filings and dummy addresses, and I had no intention of changing that. Let the world speculate. Let Jackson stew. Let Merritt Thorne wake up in his manor with nothing left but a name and a scandal. Still, the whispers started. Who was the mystery woman in the black dress who shut down the Thorn Club on Valentine's night? Someone said she was an heiress. Another said she was a widow from New York. A few even guessed I was Merritt's long-lost daughter, come to reclaim her birthright in dramatic fashion. None of them guessed the truth, that I was the farm girl from Hawthorne, Tennessee, the one no one remembered, the one they'd thought could be used and discarded like yesterday's paper. But Jackson remembered. Oh, he remembered. He came knocking 3 days later. I was sitting in the office of a small private equity firm I'd recently joined as a silent partner, Darby, Langston, and Frost, when the front receptionist buzzed me. There's a man asking for you. Won't give his name. I didn't have to ask. I knew. Send him up, I said, calmly closing the folder in front of me. I smoothed my blouse, readied the ribbon at my collar, and waited. Jackson walked in like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw unshaven, and the expensive coat he wore looked borrowed, as if it no longer belonged to him. It probably didn't. The Thorn Club was his father's last profitable asset. With that gone, the family's financial decay was no longer something they could sweep under a Persian rug. You did this, he said, the moment the door shut behind him. I did, I replied. His hands balled into fists, but he didn't move. Why? I tilted my head. You need me to explain it? He sat uninvited and dropped his elbows onto the desk. I was a kid. It was a stupid game. I was drunk. We were all stop. My voice was soft but sharp. You were cruel. You weren't drunk, you were proud. Proud enough to announce the bet in public. Proud enough to laugh about it in a tavern. You didn't forget me, Jackson. You just never thought I'd get the power to matter. He looked down at the floor. I lost everything, he muttered. You could have ruined me quietly. Why'd you do it like that? I leaned forward. Because that's how you did it. Publicly, loudly, with audience and applause. You made a game of a girl's dignity. And I wanted you to feel it the same way center stage. He didn't argue. For once in his charmed, silver-spooned life, he had no defense. What now? He asked, voice small. I stood, walked to the window. The Charleston skyline looked golden in the late afternoon sun. That's up to you, I said. You can rebuild, or you can wither. But your legacy, Jackson, it's different now. Your name won't carry a club. Your charm won't shield your disgrace. You're no longer the boy who always wins. You're the man who lost it all to the girl he bet on. He rose slowly, unsure whether to beg or walk away. Do you hate me? He asked, just before reaching the door. No, I said truthfully. I don't hate you. I just outgrew you. He paused, then left without another word. And just like that, Jackson Thorne stepped out of my life for the last time. No fire. No glass-shattering drama. Just a quiet ending. The kind that hurts more than screaming ever could. Later that evening, I sat alone in my study, sipping a small glass of cherry cordial. The file on the Thorn Club sat closed beside me, its work complete. I thought back to Aunt Pearl and her words. Let them write you off, sugar. Just be the one holding the pen when the real story begins. I was, and I still am. it would have been easy to sell the building after the dust settled. I could have torn it down, turned it into a boutique hotel or leased it to a high-end restaurant. But that would have made me no different than the men who saw value only in profit. I wanted something more, something that stood taller than revenge. The Thorn Club had been a fortress of exclusion for nearly 50 years, a boys-only haven behind velvet curtains, a place where secrets were traded like cigars, and women were only welcome as decoration. But I didn't want to destroy that space. I wanted to transform it. So I returned to the club one week after the eviction. Alone. It was a gray Tuesday morning. Rain streaked down the high windows as I stepped into the grand lobby, now silent. Dust hung in the air like memory. The velvet chairs were still there. So was the grand piano near the fireplace. But the scent of old bourbon and arrogance had faded. I walked through each room with a notepad, scribbling down ideas. Where once they held cigar lounges, I envisioned reading rooms. Where they debated in dark paneled libraries, I pictured rows of desks for young girls studying business, finance, law. By nightfall, I had the concept: the Elysian House, a women's institute, open to all ages, a space where girls could walk in quiet and come out powerful. It would be part library, part co-working space, part scholarship hub. No velvet ropes, no gatekeeping, just opportunity, wrapped in silence and strength. It felt right. I brought the idea to Gideon and Harvey. They raised their brows at first. You want to turn a gentleman's club into a place for young women to learn? I smiled. Exactly. They chuckled but agreed. We filed for the permits, brought in contractors, and by spring, the renovations began. The smoking lounges were gutted, the bar removed, the chandeliers restored and rewired. Even the upstairs poker rooms were knocked down to create open-concept study spaces with warm wood tones and stained glass windows. I kept one piece untouched: the main staircase, the same staircase I'd stood on when I told Jackson the truth. I wanted it preserved, not as a shrine to revenge, but as a reminder of evolution. Power changes hands when we take the steps ourselves. Word spread quickly. Donations poured in, especially from women who had once been excluded from such spaces. The Charleston Herald ran a new headline: from club to classroom, woman turns boys' haven into beacon for young women. That time, they used my real name, Katherine Elizabeth, a girl from Hawthorne, a girl they once bet on, a girl who turned pain into blueprint. In late May, we hosted our first gathering. 50 young women from across the county, seated in newly polished rooms with books in their hands and futures in their eyes. I watched from the upper balcony as they listened to the guest speaker, an attorney who had grown up just like I had, scraping by, underestimated, and fierce because of it. One of the girls, maybe 17, caught my eye. She was seated in the front row, scribbling furiously into a notebook. Long brown braid, freckles, nervous fingers. I saw myself in her. After the session ended, I approached her. You're a fast writer, I said. She looked up, surprised. I have a lot to say. I smiled. That's good. Just make sure when the world's loud, you write louder. She nodded. Thank you, Miss Katherine, I said. Just Katherine. She didn't know my story, not yet, but she would. Not because I'd tell her every detail, but because she'd live it in her own way. She'd walk into rooms built to lock her out, and she'd take a seat at the table anyway, because that's the real victory, isn't it? Not revenge, not power, legacy. The summer days rolled in with heavy skies and the scent of gardenia on every corner. The Elysian House had found its rhythm. Mornings buzzed with lectures, afternoons brimmed with journal writing and quiet conversations, and evenings were filled with ambition. You could feel it in the walls, the kind of energy only created by women who had never been allowed to speak loud, now learning how to roar. I kept a modest office tucked upstairs, near the same balcony where I once delivered Jackson's downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very place where he had laughed over whiskey and wagers now echoed with the tapping of typewriters and young women discussing how to run companies, fight court battles, and own property. But history, like wind, has a way of circling back. It was late August when Judith Thorne walked through the front door. I recognized her immediately, Jackson's mother. She was always the silent figure in the background, dressed in pearls and silk, attending fundraisers with a cold grace that made her seem untouchable. In Hawthorne, she'd been more myth than woman. She stood in the main lobby now, gloved hands folded around a black handbag, lips pressed into a firm line. She wore a gray hat with a short veil, as if she were attending a funeral. And maybe, in a way, she was. I approached her slowly. Mrs. Thorne, I said evenly. Her eyes met mine. Miss Elizabeth. We stared at each other for a moment, two women from two very different sides of the same past. I came to see it for myself, she said. I've heard the stories, the newspapers, and of course from my son. I motioned for her to follow me. We walked silently past the old drawing room, now a library with soft lamplight and rows of shelves, past the old cigar parlor, now a group study chamber, where girls sat in discussion around an oak table. The house had changed, but some things still whispered beneath the renovations. Judith paused by the grand staircase. This is where it happened, she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She turned toward me. Jackson is a fool, she said. I won't defend what he did, and I won't ask for forgiveness. But I will say this: you've built something powerful. I stayed silent. Do you know why I never intervened back then? She asked, her voice low. No, I said honestly, because I was raised in a world where silence was safer than truth, where women knew things, but never said them. She gestured around the room. You broke that cycle. My son deserved to lose everything. But I didn't. I didn't know what to say. Judith Thorne, once a ghost behind her husband's empire, was now flesh and contradiction. She stepped closer. I don't expect reconciliation, Miss Elizabeth, but I would like to offer something. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick and pressed with wax. I sold my estate, she said. It was too large for one woman and filled with too many memories. Inside this envelope is a check, along with the deed to a plot of land coastal, undeveloped. I want it to go to Elysian House. Maybe another branch, a second chance. I blinked. You want to donate to this? She smiled, though it was weary. I spent too long trapped in a man's kingdom. I'd like to help build one that belongs to women. I took the envelope with steady hands. Thank you, I said sincerely. Judith nodded. She turned to leave, then paused. He remembers you, you know. Every Valentine's Day. I hope he does, I replied. After she left, I walked back into my office, closed the door, and sat for a long time staring at the envelope. I didn't need the land. I didn't even need the money. But what I did need was to know the cycle had cracked, that the sins of the fathers wouldn't rot in silence. Elysian House had started as an act of vengeance, but now it had become a home for redefinition. And Judith Thorne's gift, unexpected as it was, only proved something I had been learning all along. Some victories don't look like triumph. Some look like broken women building bridges out of the ruins of their past. By the first snowfall of December, the name Elysian House had started to echo beyond Charleston. Letters arrived weekly, some typed, others written in careful cursive. Girls from Mississippi, Georgia, even as far as Colorado, asking if there would ever be another branch of Elysian House near them. They had heard about what we were doing. They wanted .at first. I hesitated. I'd built Elysian from the marrow. Of one memory. Could it work without the scar that birthed it? But then I remembered Judith Thorne's envelope. The land she donated sat on a quiet strip just outside Savannah, Georgia, a mile from the coast, bordered by cypress trees and oyster beds. It was untouched, with nothing but sea wind and potential. I visited the site in January and stood alone at the edge of the marsh, boots sinking into soft earth, wind pulling my coat around my legs. The silence spoke to me. I could hear them: future voices, girls yet to come, talking, dreaming, owning. And I knew the second house would rise. Construction began that spring, funded by a blend of Judith's donation, grants, and the funds we'd grown through private investors. This time, it wasn't just mine. It was ours. A council of women helped design the space. Alumni from the first Elysian House, lawyers, writers, and even a few single mothers who had found a second chance in its halls. We made the second house lighter than the first, glass windows tall and wide, study rooms with sea views, rooftop gardens with bookshelves built into the benches. It didn't need the bones of a man's mistake to define it. It was born clean, and with that growth, my name began to circulate publicly. I was invited to speak at women's conferences. Magazines requested interviews. Journalists reached out for the full story, the juicy tale of the girl who took revenge with a real estate portfolio and a velvet boot heel. I turned most of them down, because this story was never about punishment. It was about power reclaimed. Still, in April of that year, I accepted an invitation to speak at the Southern Women's Legacy Forum in Richmond. The crowd was large, over 500 women students, politicians, educators. They wanted to hear the story, all of it. I stood behind the podium and took a breath. My name is Katherine Elizabeth. I was once the quiet girl in the corner, the one everyone underestimated, the one they made bets about. But I'm here not because of what was done to me, but because I refused to let that be the final page. I paused. The room listened, still and sure. I believe in redirection more than revenge. I believe that sometimes the best justice isn't tearing someone down, it's building something so high they can never reach it. Thunderous applause followed, but I didn't smile for the praise. I smiled because I believed it. Back in Charleston, the original Elysian house continued to grow. Girls who had started at our desks were now writing their own books, launching their own businesses. One became the youngest woman ever appointed to the South Carolina Education Board. Another opened a legal clinic for low-income families in rural towns. As for Jackson, I hadn't seen him since our last conversation in my office. But I heard things. He'd moved north for a while, tried to start a business, failed, eventually returned to Tennessee to help manage the family estate, which was dwindling faster than gossip. And then one afternoon, in late summer, a postcard arrived. No return address, just a photo of the old Hawthorne Bridge where we once walked. On the back, one sentence, scrawled in his familiar hand. I still remember. I tucked the card away in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. Some echoes don't deserve to be fed. They just need to exist like reminders in the attic of your memory. Life moved on. So did I. It was nearly 5 years to the day since I'd first stepped into Charleston with a broken heart and a vengeance blueprint folded in my coat pocket. Now, with 2 thriving Elysian houses under my care and plans for a third in progress, I was asked to return to the place I once fled, Hawthorne, Tennessee. The invitation came from Miss Adeline, the headmistress of Hawthorne Academy. A sweet woman with silver hair and strong hands who used to slip extra bread rolls into my school lunch tray. They were planning the school's centennial celebration, and she wanted alumni who'd made something of themselves to return for the ceremony. I stared at the letter for nearly an hour before answering. There was a part of me that didn't want to go back. What purpose did it serve? I'd left that town with ashes in my shoes and fire in my gut, but something deeper whispered, go back, on your terms. Let them see who you became. So I did. I arrived in Hawthorne on a golden October afternoon, the kind of day where the leaves hang like burnt sugar in the trees. I drove past familiar fields and red barns, the gas station that once sold me ink and notebooks, the diner where Maggie Bell had told me the truth, even Barnett's pub still standing, though the paint had faded. It was all smaller than I remembered. Funny how growth makes everything else shrink. The school had changed little. The old bell still sat crooked atop the roof. The gymnasium still smelled faintly of wood polish and teenage sweat, but the crowd inside was dressed in Sunday best, murmuring over old yearbooks and glass punch bowls. I stepped in quietly, wearing a navy blue coat and simple gloves. No fanfare, no speeches, just a walk through memory. It wasn't long before faces began to turn. Some stared, some whispered, and a few brave souls came forward to shake my hand and say, "We've been reading about you." I smiled politely, gracious and cool. But then came a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Well, I'll be. Look what Hawthorne turned out after all." Merritt Thorne. He was older now, stooped slower, with a cane in one hand and bitterness in his eyes. Still dressed like old money, though there was less of it now. "If the talk around town was true, you here to buy the school too?" he asked with a sneer. "No," I said evenly. "I'm just visiting. But if it ever goes up for sale, I'll let you know." He huffed and walked away, the pride in him still unyielding, even in defeat. But another Thorne stood behind him. Jackson. He looked different, worn, quieter. No longer the prince of the room. Just another man trying to figure out what came after Legacy collapsed. He approached with slow steps, stopping a few feet in front of me. "You came back," he said. "Only for the weekend." He nodded. "I heard about the second house. And the third's on the way," I replied. He looked down, then up again, searching my face. "I used to think power came from names, from being born into something." "It doesn't," I said. "It comes from building, brick by brick." "I know that now." Silence stretched between us. Not angry, not charged, just final. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "But I wanted to say, if it means anything, I'm sorry. I studied his face. There was no smugness left, no charm. I hope you're not sorry because you lost, I said softly. I hope you're sorry because you finally understood what you took from people. He looked away. I am. I nodded. Then kindly, I said, good. And that was it. And no fire. No fury. Just a quiet closing of a door that had hung open far too long. I spent the rest of the evening walking the school grounds. I sat for a while on the front steps, watching the sun fall over the same fields where I once felt so small. Now I felt grounded, steady, taller than I'd ever been. Before I left, I stopped by Aunt Pearl's old farmhouse, now abandoned, the fence leaning and the shutters loose. I stepped through the tall grass and laid a single white magnolia on the porch swing. Thank you, I whispered into the air, not just to her but to the pain, the shame, the silence. All of it had led me here, and I wasn't done yet. The winter. I turned 30. I stood on the rooftop of the third Elysian house, this one built in Asheville, North Carolina, nestled among mountain ridges and cold wind. The lights below glittered like stardust, and inside, the halls bustled with young women, reading, sketching, typing, and dreaming. Every detail of this house had come from the hands of women. The timber sourced by a mother-daughter logging crew in Tennessee, the stained glass windows cut by a female artisan from Vermont, even the soundproofing designed by an engineer who'd once been denied a university seat because she was too pretty to study physics. I breathed in the crisp air, from heartbreak to heritage. That's what this had become. Each Elysian house bore a plaque near the front entrance, simple brass with engraved words that read, "This house stands for every woman told she couldn't, and for the ones who dared anyway." I didn't need my name on it, but people knew. The legend had grown, and by now, I'd been invited to every board, panel, and committee that had once locked its doors to girls from Hawthorne. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in sitting at tables where the chairs had been designed for someone else's comfort. I'd rather build new rooms. I still received letters from young women across the country, but one letter arrived that surprised me. It was from Maggie Bell, the very girl who had once whispered the truth into my ear all those years ago. The girl who had warned me about the bet before I could fall into it. Her letter was short but warm. She'd moved to Illinois, raised a daughter, and was now teaching literature at a community college. "You probably don't remember me," she wrote, "but I've never forgotten what you did after the Valentine's party. I think you might have saved more than just yourself that night." I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box where I kept things not for the world but for me. Inside that box were Aunt Pearl's recipe card, the original property deed to the Thorn Club, and the sealed eviction notice I'd dropped at Jackson's feet. One final item rested at the bottom, the cocktail napkin from Barnett's pub, torn and yellowed. The one where his friend had written the bet down in crude letters. "Jack bets $50 he can bed the new girl by V-Day." I'd kept it, not out of pain, but as proof that the world had tried to write a story about me, a small, shallow, predictable story. But I had taken the pen back. Now, the story belonged to me. Not every woman gets that chance. Not every woman gets to say, "I changed the ending." But if even one more girl can stand taller, walk stronger, or speak louder because of what we've built, then all of it was worth it. Sometimes, revenge doesn't look like fire. Sometimes it looks like a house filled with books, laughter, and purpose. Sometimes revenge is building something so beautiful they'll never believe it rose from pain. Before the year ended, I made one final decision. I had an artist commission a portrait for the original Elysian house, something to hang near the staircase, where it had all begun. The painting showed a faceless woman in a black dress, standing alone beneath a spotlight on a marble staircase, head tilted, back straight. No name, no plaque, just strength and posture. Let them guess, let them whisper, let the legend do what it does best: breathe. I am Katherine Elizabeth, daughter of Hawthorne, keeper of silence, breaker of doors, and builder of houses that last. The end story. Reflection questions. Do you think Katherine's revenge was justified, or did she go too far? What was the most powerful turning point in her journey? How does legacy differ from revenge in the final chapters? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.